From the river to OC? Hello, and welcome to our podcast discussion. We currently don't have a name for our series, but I'm Adam.
And I'm Josh. We're two university social work students who will be discussing social justice for the Palestinian community within Ottawa context, in particular the role of OCDSB, aka the Ottawa-Carleton District School Board, which is the largest school board in Ottawa. Thank you for clicking on this podcast. Just want you to know that we will be speaking about topics surrounding anti-Semitism, anti-Palestinian racism, and colonialism. If you're not in the headspace, there's no pressure to listen to it. You can always come back later if you want. Take care of yourself and take care of others.
The OCDSB has a track record for being the most progressive school board in Ottawa and one of the most inclusive ones in Ontario. With the rise in public controversy over events happening in Palestine and Israel, discussions around human rights and social justice are highly controversial and very popular. Even here in Ottawa, a separate part of the world from Gaza, engaging with the topic of Palestine is not always straightforward. Within the context of this major school board, this is still applicable. How do we make sense of it all? And are these global issues affecting us even on the other side of the world? The goals of this podcast are to raise awareness and promote discussion on the apparent challenges of Palestinian solidarity within the OCDSB as it relates to two key incidents. To be clear, the examples we'll highlight do not encompass all of the tensions or issues in the OCDSB relating to Palestinian solidarity, and we're also not trying to suggest that these incidents uniquely represent the nature of the relationship between the school board and the Palestinian community, as Josh and I are not members of this community. However, we do intend to highlight what appear to be some discrepancies between the stipulated values and policy versus the impact of the school board as experienced by Palestinian Canadians and people from other groups working towards allyship.
And also regarding the values of OCDSB, is clearly stated that within their policy that they believe in equity of opportunity and equity of access, putting emphasis on inclusive school systems that reflect these values. So overall, our purpose here is that we want to have a critical podcast discussion covering the tensions that our surrounding networks and communities have raised with OCDSB engagement regarding Palestinian social justice.
The two incidents we'll be discussing are the OCDSB cutting ties with Capital Pride after they released a statement of solidarity with the Palestinian community, and staff members representing the OCDSB penalizing and publicly criticizing a student valedictorian at one of their high schools for addressing Palestinian human rights in their ceremonial speech. These incidents were significant and recent, and they pushed us as an Ottawa community to find a way to come to terms with how we relate to reconciliation, how we relate to the Palestinian community, the Jewish community, and ourselves. Josh and I want to make it very clear, again, we're not from the Palestinian community, and we are not the voices that should be listened to primarily. We're doing this because we both care about social justice, and we're both living in the Ottawa community. One of us is from here, I'm from here my whole life, and particularly as it relates to the OCDSB, because we both have some meaningful relationships with this institution. So yes, we both relate to the school board in different ways regarding our identities. Hello again, my name's Adam. I'm a racialized university student of multi-ethnic heritage. I'm doing my MSW, and I have 14 years of experience being brought up through the OCDSB system as a Black boy. So I have my own perspectives and lived experiences that come from that, and these have also informed my sort of community work that I do largely within the Black community, as well as at a professional level supporting racialized youth who also happen to be going through this system.
Hi, again, my name is Josh. I'm talking about my social identity. I'm a white male, and I did not grow up in Ottawa, so my experience with OCDSB is not nearly as long as Adam's. But I do have experience of being a parent of a student in OCDSB and kind of developing from there. So that's kind of where I'm coming from.
All right, so do we have any rules before we really get into this, Josh? Any rules for our discussion?
I mean, I think the biggest rule for me is just kind of keep it critical and keep it open. We made it clear that OCDSB values equity and equity of access and having these conversations in this critical thought piece. So it's really not to demonize OCDSB, but to kind of keep everyone accountable to these issues and just having an open conversation about these issues, because there's not exactly a specific right or wrong answer, but to keep things keep us thinking about these things.
Absolutely. I think those are great points, and I'm gonna piggyback off of that. It's important to have an open mind, and me as someone who's gone through that school system in Ottawa, I learned critical thinking from them. So I think it's only right, it's only just for me and hopefully others to use this magnifying glass that we were gifted from them to apply it back to this institution amongst other places and areas of society. So yeah, our rules are to be critical in our thinking and our discussions, hopefully also to be ethical and to stay hopeful and to have a positive and relatively light discussion.
Yes, that's an important bit, because I mean, we understand that these are edgy topics, and it's really to remind ourselves to have fun and be respectful and all that jazz.
Yeah. So this isn't a typical male podcast, and the point isn't for either of us to share our personal opinions per se, but to highlight the apparent perceptions of shortcomings within this school board. But of course, like Josh mentioned, this isn't to detract from the positive aspects and the really constructive impact that it's having on the youth and families of diverse identity backgrounds. All right, so we're going to start by getting into some history. Back in the 1940s, the Second World War was happening and the Nazi regime in Europe was in full swing. Unfortunately, millions and millions of Jews were persecuted and killed within the Holocaust. Many of us are already familiar with this major genocide event. However, what followed in 1948 as a result of all this trauma and the disenfranchisement of Jews in Europe is the creation of the Israeli state, which happened on Palestinian territories at the expense of Palestinian people of Muslim, Jewish, and Christian heritage, or faith backgrounds, who are already living there and coexisting peacefully. This colonization event of Palestine is referred to as the Nakba, which translates to the catastrophe. And for the past 77 or so years, Palestinian people have still been existing on their land, but having less and less access and freedom within their territory, and have been going through their own human rights abuses as a result of the Israeli government, unfortunately. Lately, with the rise of social media and TikTok, it's a lot easier for us to talk about these issues, but one main construct that needs to be addressed within this Palestine discussion is colonialism. Colonialism is a concept where a powerful party or group takes control of the resources of a less powerful group and exploits them. Settler colonialism is the kind of colonialism where the oppressor or the powerful group stays on the land. They're not from that land, but they stay on that land and continue to oppress and exploit the people, land, resources there without leaving. And unfortunately, a lot of these atrocities follow the same experiences that Jews experienced during the Holocaust. For example, Palestinians have been going through ethnic cleansing, land dispossession, over-policing, and bombardment, and many other unspeakable crimes and atrocities that are disproportionately affecting the children, particularly in Gaza and the West Bank. When it comes to settler colonialism, this might sound a bit familiar. This is a common reality with the history of Canada, the US, Australia, and notably Canada. When we discuss the power imbalance between Palestine and Israel, this can seem a bit more complicated when we consider the fact that the Israeli state was created as a result of the Holocaust, as a way, almost as an equity-driven intervention to create a safe space for Jewish people all across the world in order for them to have a homeland and to be safe and to never have to go through such terrible atrocities again. However, in this case, that homeland was made at the expense of another people. Needless to say, the lines can be easily blurred here. Who is in the right? Both of these people are oppressed. Both of these people claim to have a claim or a tie ancestrally to this land. So how do we navigate this issue? How do we look at this objectively and critically? Oftentimes when people call out the violence and the settler colonialism of Israel, they're met with accusations of anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism, which is the discrimination against people of Jewish ancestry or faith, is a very real issue. And this isn't necessarily surprising because even within the Ottawa community, we unfortunately hear of synagogues being vandalized and hate crimes do happen against religious minority groups in Ottawa, including the Jewish community. These significant and traumatic events from the past, which have informed our current reality, where many people still think this way. Many people still think that Jewish people are inferior as human beings. So again, going back to the context of Palestine and the state of Israel in the Middle East, how do we make sense of this violence and this colonialism that's happening without detracting our support or detracting from solidarity and support for the Jewish community all across the world? Shouldn't it be possible for us to advocate for people of Jewish and Palestinian lineage? Ideally, I'd like to think that a past genocide shouldn't warrant a current one. And there's a lot more that could be said of this history and everything, and even Canada's involvement in funding Israel. But anyways, that's the general gist of this.
Yeah,
context.
And that's very powerful. Thanks for that history. I learned a lot when listening to you about the Palestinian communities. Just be open. I'm very much a learner in regards to that, and I think it's always good for all of us to learn constantly. Really, I guess it never ends. And so, kind of connecting that very very relevant story into OCDSB. We're going to go over two examples in Ottawa of, you could say, questionable display of social justice when it comes to the Palestinian community as a whole, and in Ottawa as well. So we're going to just kind of go over them. I'm going to go over them, I guess, somewhat quickly. Again, the articles will also be connected to the podcast description, so people can read them more in depth, and then we'll discuss them afterwards more in depth. So the first one is about Capital Pride. In 2024, Capital Pride issued a statement on August 6th expressing solidarity with the Palestine, recognizing the ongoing genocide, and also stating a boycott on Israeli companies. Now, not exactly clear on what specific Israeli companies, but there was a conversation about boycotting. Now, the Capitol Pride actions created controversy, with some claiming that it was anti-Semitic. So OCDSB being one of them, although I don't know if they clearly said anti-Semitic, but it was more just the fact that they did not participate in Capitol Pride in 2024. Then in 2025, Capitol Pride removed their Palestine statement. So just kind of like we can talk about why that was and what happened there, especially with OCDSB pulling out of the Capitol Pride when typically they are involved. So that's kind of one example. The other example is what we're calling the Bell graduation ceremony, specifically Bell because it's the Bell High School. Sorry, I messed up that word. The valedictorian. Wow, you get stuck on words. A valedictorian at Bell High School made a pro-Palestinian remark during a speech at her graduation ceremony. As a commitment to truth and reconciliation, I must acknowledge colonial and genocidal atrocities today, including the massacre of more than 17,000 Palestinian children in Gaza. That's the direct quote that she said. The next day, the student received a call from the school principal stating that their speech had caused harm and that it was unauthorized and that the students would not be allowed to go to school on Monday. The student. Although the school said that they did not suspend anyone, the principal asked the student to stay home so that the principal could speak to her. The principal sent an email to the students' parents after the ceremony explaining that the speech intentionally took focus away from the event. The students' response was supportive of this speech. So I want to make that clear that for the most part, the students' response to the speech was good. There was applause. Overall, the students liked the speech. Now, I can't speak to obviously all the students, but just in generally, the students were okay with the speech.
The students and many teachers as well who went and told the valedictorian that they thought she did a great job with the speech.
Yeah, exactly. So very good point, Adam. And so ODSB provided an email statement stating that the commencement ceremonies are supposed to be joyful celebrations. They're meant to provide an inclusive experience for all students, staff, and families. Yes, we'll talk about the inclusive part soon. OCDSB reports to provide forums for students to discuss community issues, but commencement ceremonies is not one of them. So I guess overall, the question is, what does this decision mean regarding the OCDSB's relationship with the Palestinian community?
Even though I changed, doesn't mean you changed.
All right, so now we're gonna have a bit of a discussion on the impacts and the harms that were, according to the community and from our perspective, from a social work lens, the harms that were had on the Ottawa community members, and particularly from the Palestinian community. Performative allyship is a phenomenon where a person or party demonstrates collective action or activism or solidarity or support for a particular group involved in a social justice cause. And this collective action is driven by incentives rooted in personal gain rather than community support. A great example of this would be from 2020, when many people on social media would post black squares and the hashtag Black Lives Matter following the murder of George Floyd, when these actions were not accompanied by real action or meaningful support for the Black community. This could be seen as relevant to the OCDSB's engagement with the Palestinian community as well, in theory, given the mismatch between the words and statements and policies of promoting progressive, safe spaces and inclusivity for everyone, and their actions of actually following through with this. There wasn't necessarily, the problem isn't that there was inaction per se, but in this case that there was a response countering the attempts at expression from the leaders and allies for the Palestinian community in Ottawa.
Yeah, and just to add in about the students' speech too, is like the comments about OCDSB is kind of confusing me, because they specifically mentioned about an inclusive experience, and to what you were talking about, I'm a bit confused to how silencing the student is inclusive. Like that piece doesn't particularly make sense, as well as the concept of having a style of the commencement ceremony being joyful. Well, what does that exactly mean, and how I just go back to, there was cheering and people liked the statement. Mm-hmm. So there can be connection and joy in these kind of solidarity pieces as well. So I just kind of wanted to state that.
No, thank you, and that makes sense, Josh, because it's like, this is supposed to be, the idea that this is supposed to be a joyful ceremony, but who defines what is joyful when you have, say, at Bell High School, where there's such a large Arab and Muslim student, including Palestinian student population? Who's making that decision of what is important to be shared at that ceremony? Of course, as a school administrator, there have to be some rules, and undoubtedly they need to put students in check, but it makes you wonder, was there any consultation in that process?
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I just kind of, sorry, I might be bringing a random thing up, but just going on about the Pride Parade too, is like I kind of asked the question, is like, at what point is it going too far or not far enough? And I mentioned about like the boycott of the Israeli companies. Do you think that OCDSB was correct or incorrect, or maybe even just we don't know, but just in regards to pulling out of the Capitol Pride, which would affect their kind of relationship with the Palestinians?
Yeah, Josh, that's a really great question. Honestly, I think if you want to frame the OCDSB as an individual party, I believe they had good intentions. They were trying to be protective, and they were trying to be in line with their inclusive values with respect to the Jewish community, because many Jewish community members had come forward and publicly criticized Capitol Pride for releasing this statement and accusing it of being anti-Semitic. I believe the OCDSB had wanted to protect the Jewish community because they were conflating anti-Semitism with Zionism. So, and there's a good opportunity to bring up this new term. So Zionism is different from Judaism. Judaism is the religion and the faith that many people of Jewish ancestry practice, and you can also convert to this religion. Zionism is a doctrine that you can subscribe to or not. It's a free country. You can choose to believe what you want, but the doctrine of Zionism follows or supports this idea that people of Jewish faith and ancestry have an ancestral tie to this holy land of Israel, and particularly Eastern European Jews. So not just the idea, there's a difference between saying, I believe my people have been through so much from the Holocaust and from everything, we deserve to move forward and to never return to a point like that again in history, and to have a homeland where we can all rejoice and build towards a better future for all our descendants. There's a difference between saying that and saying we're going to do that by causing a living hell for another group and initiating another genocide for another group. So does that make sense? To many people that does make sense. So I hope it's clear Zionism is not the same as Judaism. I believe the OCDSB was afraid that if they maybe they were afraid that if they continued to support capital pride that that would be an anti-Semitic action. However, given that these things are not conflatable, not when you use a critical lens, that action doesn't seem to have been the most appropriate, or at least from the perspective of many Jewish and Palestinian community members. There's an organization called Jewish Voices for Peace, where people of Jewish background will speak out against Zionism, amongst other things, or in its different manifestations, and they'll be champions for social justice and human rights of Palestinian people and other groups. So, yeah. So this may not have even been I really don't think it was a targeted, intentional act of stigmatizing and demonizing the Palestinian community so much as an attempt to not look like they're a part of the problem. However, what it just revealed was that they don't appear to understand the problem. Because look at the history. And also look furthermore, and don't ask me, ask people from Jewish Voices for Peace, ask Jewish people who, again, they're not a monolith, they're not all going to agree with the doctrine of Zionism. Ask the Jewish people who feel that their religion is unequivocally and categorically against what's happening in Palestine and the actions of the Israeli government. So I believe there are a lot of discussions that need to happen. And also, not to mention the optics of removing your support from one of the most prominent 2S LGBTQIA plus organizations in the city, the nation's capital. I wonder almost like what sort of impact was that expected to have on the queer and trans students who are navigating the OCDSB. But, that could be a whole discussion in itself, I think.
Okay, yeah, so that makes a ton of sense.
Thank you. So additionally, I want to say, continuing off of these harmful impacts, so the silencing, when in both of these cases, we saw that Palestinian advocacy for the Palestinian community was met with what was shot down, essentially, intolerance for these comments and mischaracterization as being discriminatory against another group. These consequences could be understood as being just two isolated incidents, but actually they could also be seen as setting a precedent for community members' behavior in the future. For example, if you're a Palestinian community member or a potential ally for this community, you might think to yourself, after seeing the valedictorian and the capital pride incidents, you might wonder, will there be consequences for me if I speak my mind? Am I safe to express myself or to stand up for my community as a student within the OCDSB? Will I be stigmatized? Will I be demonized? Will I be understood? So this sends a message to potential future leaders of these communities. Is this something that could represent a limit to critical thinking? Would this be justified?
I mean, even OCDSB, from your experience with OCDSB, that critical thinking is a primary source and very important of education as a whole, right? Like that's kind of like a big portion of the education, and not to go too much into to it because this is this topic, but critical thinking is even more important for the fact that we have access to a whole bunch of different information through internet, through AI. The information is so easily accessible now. So critical thinking is extremely important. In this case, understanding what's going on with the Palestinian community and what is going on and the difference between anti-Semitic comments or anti-Zionism, all these pieces is reason why critical thinking is so important, and being careful, kind of like what information we are consuming. And just being critical of these things, and not critical in a negative sense of like bringing everyone down, but in a critical sense of what you're speaking about by justice and keeping ourselves and other people accountable in a more positive way of growth.
Critical thinking helps us see also what's going on already in the world around us, and thusly how we can potentially change those circumstances. So we can have colonization at the level of the idea and the mind, where, yes, at face value, this is a safe space. We're at a school where all ideas are welcome and everyone is welcome regardless of their culture, and there are no bad ideas, and people can be forgiven when they make mistakes. But this also depends on the background of who's saying the comment and the nature of the rule break. It's almost like this is more of a taboo topic.
Yeah, I agree that it does seem like it is very much a taboo topic, and really in kind of sticking to the critical mind piece. Once something is a taboo topic, it's really kind of like quickly thinking about that of like, why is it taboo? And just to add in about the principal's response, I'm assuming here, I'm not fully sure, but I'm just curious to, like, as I remember what you were saying, Adam, is like what was in place for the principal at that time? Like, did the principal have people to talk to kind of mull this over? Because the principal's response seemed to be very kind of like very responsive. No, not responsive, not the word. Kind of just reacted.
Reactive.
Very reactive. That's probably a better word. Yeah, very reactive. And I'm just curious if the principal had the support as well of kind of really looking these over, because like we're talking about, these topics can bring up these emotions, which is perfectly fine. So it's like, and sometimes we all just respond without thinking. So I just wonder, when it comes to OCDSB, is there really a process for these things to come out? Or when something like this comes out, to have these conversations where I would hope, maybe this is just hopeful thinking, if these conversations happen within OCDSB, the results could have been a lot better, that didn't involve essentially silencing a student.
And ultimately, despite the fact that in the case of the valedictorian, the comments were, despite the fact that these comments were painted as causing harm, maybe if there was some level of consultation or clarity on this process, and if it happened, then this could have prevented a harm that was actually inflicted upon the student, being that she was publicly criticized for her speech, and her name, I don't know if she was a minor at the time, grade 12, but now her name is forever, we're not going to mention her, but it's forever out on the internet and always going to be associated with standing up for Palestinian human rights, where this is already very contentious topic, and could could lead to some challenges potentially in the future. She didn't say it for no reason. Like, this was a topic that mattered to her. This student, again, a person of color, a young girl, and her brain's still developing. Maybe she forgot about the rules, or she got overly excited. Mistakes happen. Kids are developing, children are developing. This is
we're all developing. I still make mistakes.
Right? I hear you on that one. But could this have been approached differently? You know, and there's a really important term I want to bring up here, being cultural humility, which is the idea that as an outsider to a particular group, we make ourselves humble, and we assume that a social group, for example, Palestinians, are the expert on their experience and their culture and what's sacred and matters to them. So she didn't, again, this student who is an ally to the Palestinian community, it seems to me that she understood that this is something that mattered to them and to her friends and to her peers. But this wasn't necessarily the perception by the school board. So yeah, with cultural humility, when we apply cultural humility, this can keep us from reacting right away or jumping to conclusions or making assumptions.
I think, coming from my my positionality of being being white, like I can't particularly hide that. Well, I mean, you're only hearing my voice, but I mean, I can't particularly hide that piece. But I understand what you mean about like the responding piece, like just responding, and I can see how the speech is made, and your automatic response maybe is that it's anti-Semitic. Let's just say that for example, I can see myself being like, whoa, that's just controversial, and as a leader, I don't even want to touch controversy, right? So my first thing is like, oh, immediately this has done harm, and maybe it's more harm to the principal themselves than harm to the school. I don't know, but I would agree that at the very least, in talking about that piece of cultural humility, is like there's almost like a process that needed to be had of conversations with the different groups that were involved, and having a real conversation of like what harms were done, and even more importantly, what good was from this. Like, we're talking about a lot of the students, a lot of the teachers, staff were on board with this speech. So, like, it doesn't also have to be black and white either. Like, there can be harm and also a lot of good. And having these conversations of cultural humility really can just open that door of understanding.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that is what we've learned in our courses so far. And without cultural humility, without the integration of cultural humility in our process of engaging with other communities, we can come across as gaslighting these communities, quite frankly. In this case, with the girl was painted as having caused harm, but that's even before the Palestinian community gets to respond to that or speak on what impact was felt or had in that case. The narrative was already being written by a settler perspective. We've learned from our courses as well, like from a critical race theory perspective, that whiteness, and which can have parallels with being a settler, whiteness is, as a construct, it has some associations with comfort and the need to have comfort, and this can be related to wanting to have control over a situation. So I'm not shocked why there was this response.
I just wanted to add just a quick thing about the uncomfortable piece.
Mm-hmm.
I think being uncomfortable is not just professional. I do think just in general, this idea of like we as well, you're mentioning white people, so I'll mention white people as well. Me being a white settler, I completely agree. Me being a settler, so there's a point in this that. That you need to accept a level of discomfort in these conversations. You have to accept that you don't know everything. Like I was raised, and again, I'm not trying to generalize to every white person. Obviously, I am not a representation of every white person, nor will I ever say I am. But I think of the way I was raised, and this is this idea of always being right. Like you always have to be right with everything, and there's you need, or me. I should talk specifically myself. I'm working on being okay with being not right, and having that discomfort in these open conversations. So just kind of speak to what Adam was saying about how you do have to get yourself out there. And you do have to be uncomfortable, and that is how you learn, really, and how you open up to kind of like different ways of knowing. So yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so overall, my recommendations for the future, well, my recommendation for what it's worth for the OCDSB in the future would be ideally to consider a higher level of consultation with the Palestinian community prior to engaging in prior to responding, not just for the sake of protecting the students, but also for the image of the school, since like we're allowed to care about our image as individuals and as institutions. That's not a bad thing in itself. But when given the nature of this topic and how contentious and controversial it is, any response in any direction has the risk to be seen as controversial. This podcast has the risk of being seen as controversial, and it probably will ruffle some feathers. But again, it isn't we haven't landed on this topic by choice or by being assigned it. We care about this, and we have friends from this community. We're doing what we can. Again, please feel free to fact check us in the comments, leave your thoughts and facts. Anyways, because we're neither of us are members of this community, and we want to come from a place of cultural humility if possible. So yeah, but Josh and I have learned from our courses that consultation is a cornerstone of cultural humility. So talking about our reflections, changing gears now, moving right along. So talking about our reflections on all of this and this project based on our social identities, personally, I have fears that my collective action or my community advocacy could be taken out of context or used to stigmatize me, even in just creating this podcast. So me, as a Black man, there is stigma that does unfortunately exist against my community, where we can be mischaracterized as being more hostile or aggressive than we actually are, even if we're just being passionate. So I feel like I have to try to keep a hold of my passion for this topic, or watch my words carefully for fear of for fear of getting in a conflict or upsetting someone. But ultimately, this is what my education has taught me, and this is what my upbringing has taught me as well. So that's my main reflection. It's a fear of being silenced or having to deal with the consequence myself. But ultimately, it's not about me. It's about trying to support the community, right? Even in us, we're not changing the situation in Gaza, but we're telling the truth. And I feel like, or we're telling the truth as we understand it and as it is in line with what many community members are saying. So that is something.
Yeah. In kind of reflecting, I kind of reflected a little bit before, but like kind of reflecting on my experiences. I mean, this is the first podcast I've ever done, so right. So
same here.
I'm I go at this like as a learner, and I do like it. There is that danger in that of speaking out. But at the same, and there's definitely fear there. At the same time, there's also fear of like staying silent when it comes in regards to these topics. So I'm kind of like in between a little bit with that. I'm gonna just say a quote that's somewhat related to our topic, but also a little bit further away, related in the way of it's a quote from Pastor Niemöller, who's a Lutheran pastor in Germany, that first sympathized with the Nazis' ideas and then later realized that he and many others were complicit through their silence regarding the atrocities committed by the Nazi regime, which is related kind of to a certain degree to Israel's goals. So I thought it sinks. But really this quote is more around the negatives and possibly even the unproductivity of being silent and often destructive. And I'm not trying to argue that in some cases silence can be good. I'm not saying that, but this is more to the destructive nature of silence. So anyways, I'll just say the quote. So the quote is, "First they came for the socialists, and I did not speak out because I was not a socialist. Then they came for the trade unionists, and I did not speak out because I was not a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews, and I did not speak out because I was not a Jew. Then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak for me." So it kind of just speaks about the fact that silence can turn back onto you. And even if it doesn't, to what Adam was saying, we're all interconnected in our humanity, and these are kind of just good reminders in regards to, because I'm coming from like being a parent of a child with in OCDSB, so I really look at it like, what is the impact of me staying silent? Well, I think the biggest impact is my comfort. Because it's uncomfortable to speak out. But at the same time, when I speak out, you can create a sort of allyship. Maybe that's not the right word, but with other parents possibly, to talk about these topics and move on this. As the when it regards to OCDSB parent, being an OCDSB's parent, we have power in that we have students actively in this. So if we're starting to notice things, you can speak out about that. To what Adam was talking about, in the Bell High School, there's a lot of people that are Arab, as well as Muslim, and so, like, even having a conversation about that, are they being represented? So it's really kind of that piece about that fear of being silent, and also the fear of the discomfort of not being silent, and is something that I am kind of constantly battling.
This podcast is being recorded by 2 Carleton social work students from stolen Algonquin territory, where there are common contexts of settler colonialism and a history of genocide, as well as tensions with reconciliation or conciliation. we're all interconnected, and I believe that we all have a place and a role to play in conciliation. So, in closing, this was From the River to OC. We'd like to thank you for listening and thinking critically with us if you made it this far. Once again, I want to emphasize the importance of critical thinking, something that they certainly taught me when I was a child in the OCDSB.
Yeah, and we see value in asking these difficult questions and normalizing these uncomfortable discussions. Our status quo doesn't have to be a permanent reality and norms that we play into. We can ask questions and think neutrally about things before accepting them and being complacent.
Quite frankly, even if these topics don't directly affect you or me, it could affect the lived experiences or quality of life of someone else. So, stay woke, stay hydrated, and who knows, maybe you'll hear from us again. This has been Adam
and Josh
signing up.
Yeah, P.S. There is going to be notes in the description going over the articles and a few other options that you can read about and ideas that things you could do.
Yeah, absolutely. Don't just take our word for it. There's tons of resources that we're going to share a few important things. For example, the organization Jewish Voices for Peace. I highly recommend learning more about them. And other things in the description. Feel free to share your comments, thoughts, and yeah, have a great day.
Can't help this feeling, never stop dreaming till the world comes around.
This remind me of a cookout with the speakers on. This it sound like when your grandma leave the TV on. Welcome home, rapping to my auntie on my speakerphone.